11-year-old Emily Carter thought it was just another flight alongside her mother, the maid. But when billionaire Michael Harrison collapsed midair, she became his only hope of survival. Her courage kept him alive. Yet as he opened his eyes, his whispered words revealed a connection to Emily's past so deep, it would shake her very identity. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A whisper mid-flight would change her life forever. Emily Carter felt a familiar pang of invisibility as she followed her mother down the plush, carpeted jet bridge. Her mother, Carol, walked with a practiced efficiency, her maid's uniform a stark contrast to the designer clothes of the other passengers boarding the private jet. The cabin of the Gulfstream G650 was a world away from their small apartment above a laundromat. Cream leather seats, polished mahogany, and gold-plated fixtures gleamed under the soft, ambient lighting. It smelled of rich leather and a faint, floral perfume. Emily clutched her worn backpack to her chest, a threadbare anchor in a sea of overwhelming luxury. She was only here because the billionaire, Mr. Harrison, had a peculiar rule. His personal staff's children were allowed to accompany their parents on holiday flights, a strange, almost performative act of generosity that felt more like a display of power than genuine kindness. "Emily, honey, find a seat and settle in. Don't touch anything," Carol whispered, her voice tight with the stress of working in such an opulent environment. She was already busy, taking coats, offering drinks, and ensuring every passenger was comfortable. Emily nodded, her blonde hair falling into her eyes. She chose a seat at the very back of the cabin, hoping to disappear into the buttery leather. Across the aisle, Mr. Harrison sat, a man carved from granite and ambition. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. His name was Michael Harrison, a titan of industry, a man who moved markets with a single word. He was engrossed in a thick financial report, his brow furrowed in concentration. He hadn't even glanced at Emily, a ghost in his gilded world. Emily pulled a well-worn book from her backpack. It was a collection of her grandfather's memoirs, a man she'd never met but knew through the faded ink of his stories. He was a legendary war medic, a hero who had saved countless lives on the battlefield, returning with a quiet dignity that resonated through his writing. As the jet began its powerful ascent, Emily lost herself in his words, the roar of the engines a distant hum. An hour into the flight, a sudden, violent jolt shook the cabin. The plane tilted sharply, and a collective gasp filled the air. Emily's book flew from her hands. Outside the window, the sky had turned a bruised, angry purple. The seatbelt sign flashed, and the pilot's voice, strained and urgent, crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit an unexpected and severe weather front. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened. We're attempting to navigate around it." But the turbulence only worsened. The jet bucked and shuddered, a toy in the grip of a giant. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the cabin's luxurious facade. Passengers cried out, their faces pale. Carol was thrown against a bulkhead, her tray of glasses crashing to the floor. It was then that Emily saw it. Mr. Harrison had slumped in his seat, his face a ghastly shade of gray. His financial report lay forgotten on the floor. His hand was clutching his chest, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. A flight attendant rushed to his side, her professional composure cracking. "Mr. Harrison? Sir, can you hear me?" she cried, her voice trembling. Carol, bruised but resolute, was already there, trying to help. "He's not responding. Is there a doctor on board?" Panic began to ripple through the cabin. The flight attendant fumbled with a medical kit, her hands shaking too much to be effective. In the midst of the chaos, a strange calm descended over Emily. It was as if her grandfather's steady, life-saving voice from the pages of his memoir was speaking to her, a voice that had faced down death in the chaos of battle. She unbuckled her seatbelt and moved with a sureness that belied her age. "Move," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the rising tide of hysteria. The flight attendant and her mother stared at her, stunned into silence. Emily knelt beside Mr. Harrison. Her eyes, a startlingly intelligent blue, scanned him with the precision of a diagnostician. She noted the bluish tinge of his lips, the carotid arteries weak, thready pulse, the slight but unmistakable scent of almonds on his breath. It was a detail her grandfather had described vividly in a chapter on battlefield toxins. "It's not a heart attack," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that no one dared to question. "It's cyanide poisoning." A wave of disbelief and horror washed over the small group. "Cyanide? That's impossible," the flight attendant stammered. Emily ignored her. Her mind, a repository of knowledge far beyond her years, was racing. Her grandfather hadn't just taught her first aid. He had filled her notebooks with detailed explanations of toxicology, of poisons used in warfare and espionage, insisting that knowing the enemy, chemical or human, was the first step to defeating it. "In the medical kit," she commanded, her voice sharp, "there should be a cyanide. It contains hydroxycobalamin. We need to administer it now." The flight attendant, spurred to action by Emily's unwavering confidence, found the kit and handed it to her. With nimble fingers, Emily prepared the injection, her movements precise and unhurried despite the violent rocking of the plane. She found a vein in Mr. Harrison's arm with the ease of a seasoned medic and administered the antidote. For a long, terrifying moment, there was no change. Mr. Harrison's breathing remained shallow, his color ashen. Then, slowly, miraculously, the bluish tint began to recede from his lips. A flicker of consciousness returned to his eyes. He took a deeper, shuddering breath, then another. The storm outside began to subside as quickly as it had appeared. The plane leveled out, and a collective sigh of relief filled the cabin. Carol stared at her daughter, her face a mixture of awe and bewilderment. Who was this calm, capable young woman who had just saved a man's life with the knowledge of a trained physician? Mr. Harrison, still weak but now fully conscious, turned his head and looked at Emily. His stormy eyes, now clear and filled with a profound, unreadable emotion, met hers. He beckoned her closer, his voice a hoarse whisper. The flight attendant and Carol leaned in, tears of relief streaming down their faces. He whispered something in Emily's ear, a sentence that made the color drain from her face. The other passengers, who had been watching the drama unfold in stunned silence, saw the girl's eyes widen in shock. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Emily began to cry. Not tears of relief, but of a deep, soul-shaking sorrow. The flight attendant, her voice choked with emotion, asked, "What did he say?" Emily looked up, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief and heartbreak. She repeated the billionaire's whispered words, and as she did, a wave of stunned silence, followed by soft, heartbroken sobs, swept through the cabin. Everyone who heard them, from the stoic pilots to the seasoned flight crew, began to cry. Mr. Harrison's voice was a dry rustle of leaves, barely audible over the hum of the engines. He looked at Emily, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that seemed to peel back all the layers of her young life, seeing not just the maid's daughter, but something more, something he recognized. "Tell Sergeant Carter," he whispered, his breath catching. His old friend Michael kept his promise. Emily's world tilted on its axis. Sergeant Carter. That was what they called her grandfather, a name etched on old medals and worn photographs. But he was gone. He had passed away just last week, his last days spent in a quiet haze of memory and regret, often speaking of an old friend he had lost touch with, a promise left unfulfilled. She repeated the words aloud, her own voice a hollow echo of the billionaire's whisper. He said, "Tell Sergeant Carter his old friend Michael kept his promise." She then looked at her mother, her face crumbling. "Grandpa died last Tuesday," she said, the words catching in her throat. He thought his friend had forgotten him. The simple, heartbreaking tragedy of it settled over the cabin. A promise kept too late. A message for a man who was no longer there to receive it. It wasn't just about a billionaire being saved. It was about a friendship that had spanned decades, a bond forged in the crucible of war, and a final, poignant message that had arrived just a few days shy of its destination. The shared humanity of the moment, the raw grief on a young girl's face, the vulnerability of the powerful man in the seat, it transcended the boundaries of wealth and status. And so they wept. The flight attendants wept for the lost friend. The other passengers wept for the girl who had saved a life only to have her own heart broken. And Carol wept for her daughter, her father, and the sudden, incomprehensible weight of it all. The rest of the flight passed in a surreal silence. The plane, now a vessel of shared sorrow, descended smoothly toward its destination in Aspen, Colorado. Mr. Harrison had drifted into a fitful, exhausted sleep, his hand still loosely holding Emily's. Emily sat numbly, the world outside the window a blur of white peaks and endless blue. Her grandfather's stories, once a source of comfort and pride, now felt like open wounds. Upon landing, the aircraft was met not by the usual black cars and discreet staff, but by a phalanx of paramedics and stern-faced security personnel. The moment the cabin door opened, the sterile efficiency of the outside world flooded in, a stark contrast to the emotional bubble they had been suspended in. Mr. Harrison was carefully transferred to a gurney, his personal physician, a sharp-eyed man named Dr. Evans, immediately taking charge. As they wheeled him toward the waiting ambulance, Mr. Harrison's eyes fluttered open. He scanned the crowd of faces until he found Emily. "You," he said, his voice stronger now. "Don't you go anywhere." It wasn't a request, it was a command. And so, while a billionaire's life hung in the balance, a 14-year-old girl and her mother were escorted to a private lounge in the airport, a place of hushed tones and expensive coffee they were too shaken to drink. Carol paced the floor, her hands twisting the fabric of her uniform. "Emily, how did you know?" "Cyanide. What's it?" she asked, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "You've never taken a medical class in your life." Emily stared out at the tarmac, at the majestic mountains that seemed so indifferent to their turmoil. "Grandpa taught me," she said softly. "He told me stories, not just about saving soldiers, but about how to see things other people miss. He said the most dangerous weapon is the one you don't expect." Her grandfather, Sergeant Thomas Carter, had been more than a medic. He was a self-taught scholar, a man who found refuge from the ghosts of war in books. He had filled Emily's head not with fairy tales, but with chemistry, toxicology, strategy, and medicine. He had trained her mind to be a fortress, to observe, analyze, and act. He had prepared her for a world he knew could be as treacherous as any battlefield. "He made me memorize medical field manuals," Emily continued, her voice distant. "He said you never know when you'll be the only one who can help. He knew about poisons. He saw things during the war." Carol sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Her daughter, whom she thought she knew, was a stranger. The quiet, bookish girl who helped her fold laundry and did her homework without complaint possessed a secret world of knowledge, a legacy from a man Carol had only known as her quiet, unassuming father. Hours later, Dr. Evans entered the lounge, his face grim. "Mr. Harrison is stable," he announced, his eyes immediately finding Emily. "He's asking for you. He refuses to speak to the authorities until he's spoken to you." Emily followed the doctor through a series of sterile corridors to a private hospital wing that looked more like a five-star hotel. Mr. Harrison was propped up in bed, for drips connected to his arm, but his color was better, and the stormy look was back in his eyes. He dismissed the doctor and nurses with a wave of his hand. When they were alone, he patted the chair beside his bed. Emily sat down, feeling small and out of place. "Sergeant Thomas Carter," Mr. Harrison began, his voice raspy but firm. "He was the best medic in the whole damn army. He saved my life more times than I can count. I was a scared kid from a rich family, playing soldier. He was the real thing. A legend." He paused, his eyes clouding with memory. "When we got out, I promised him I'd always look out for him and his family. I tried. I sent money, but he always sent it back. Said he didn't want a handout. We lost touch. I got busy building my empire, and he disappeared into a quiet life. I never stopped looking for him. I hired private investigators, but he was good at staying hidden." He looked at Emily, his expression softening. "I never knew he had a granddaughter. When I saw you, I didn't make the connection. But when you diagnosed the poison, that calm in the middle of chaos, that was pure Thomas Carter. That's when I knew." "The poison," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "How?" Mr. Harrison's face hardened. "Someone on that plane tried to murder me. The authorities are investigating. They found the source. A slow-release chemical agent. Odorless, tasteless. A few drops in my morning coffee. It was designed to mimic a heart attack, to be untraceable by the time we landed. If it weren't for you, they would have succeeded." He reached out and took her hand. His was rough and calloused, a surprising contrast to his manicured appearance. "You have your grandfather's eyes." And his courage. A tear traced a path down Emily's cheek. "The promise," she said. "What was it?" Mr. Harrison's grip tightened. "After a particularly bad ambush, our unit was decimated. We were pinned down for 3 days. He kept half a dozen of us alive with nothing but scraps and ingenuity. We made a pact. If anything ever happened to one of us, the other would dedicate their life to fulfilling the other's biggest dream. My dream was to build this company. His dream was for his family to have the one thing he never did, a chance. A real chance to do something great, to not be held back by where they came from." He looked directly into Emily's eyes, his gaze unwavering. "He saved my life, and now you, his blood, have saved it again. The Carter family has a debt from me that I can never fully repay, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying. Your mother will never have to work another day as a maid. And you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you can have anything you want. Any school, any university, any dream you can imagine. I will make it happen." That was my promise to him. And now, it is my promise to you. The weight of his words settled upon Emily. It was a life-altering declaration, a key to a future she had never dared to dream of. But as she sat there, holding the hand of the man her grandfather had saved, she realized it wasn't the money or the opportunity that mattered most. It was the connection, a thread of loyalty and courage that stretched from a jungle in Vietnam through the quiet years of her grandfather's life, and had finally found her in the chaos of a mid-flight emergency. Suddenly, a sharp knock on the door broke the silence. A grim-faced detective entered the room. "Mr. Harrison, sorry to interrupt. We've identified the person who had access to your coffee this morning. We need you to confirm." He held up a tablet displaying a security photo. Mr. Harrison glanced at the image. His face, already pale, turned to stone. He looked from the photo to Emily, a flicker of disbelief and betrayal in his eyes. He slowly turned the tablet so Emily could see. Her breath caught in her throat. The person in the photo, the person who had tried to murder the man beside her, was the last person in the world she would have ever suspected. On the screen of the tablet was a crisp, clear image from the airport's private hangar security camera. It showed a figure, discreet and familiar, leaning into the catering cart that was being prepared for the flight. In the figure's hand was a small, almost invisible vial, held over the silver coffee pot reserved for Mr. Harrison. The person in the photo was Dr. Evans, the man who had just declared Mr. Harrison stable. The man who had been his personal physician and confidant for over 20 years was the one who had tried to kill him. A deep, guttural sound, something between a gasp and a groan, escaped Mr. Harrison's lips. The color that had returned to his face drained away, leaving him looking older and more fragile than he had a moment before. It was the shock of betrayal, a wound far deeper than any poison. He had trusted this man with his life, and that trust had been turned into a weapon against him. Emily stared at the image, her mind struggling to connect the calm, professional doctor she had met just an hour ago with the would-be murderer on the screen. It didn't make sense. People in her world were straightforward. They were tired, or worried about rent, or happy about a small kindness. They weren't this. They didn't wear masks of concern while plotting death. Her grandfather had written about such men, men who used trust as camouflage, but seeing it in reality was profoundly unsettling. The detective, a man named Miller with weary eyes that had seen too much, spoke in a low, respectful tone. "We have him under surveillance, sir. He's in the hospital cafeteria. He doesn't know we're onto him yet. We just needed your positive identification before we move in." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the tablet. He looked like a king who had just discovered a traitor in his innermost circle. The fury was there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a vast, hollow sadness. "Take him," Mr. Harrison said, his voice a gravelly whisper, "and find out why." Detective Miller gave a curt nod and left the room. Through the window, Emily could see a subtle shift in the posture of the security personnel stationed down the hall. There was a new tension, a quiet, predatory focus. Mr. Harrison leaned back against his pillows, the effort seemingly costing him all his remaining strength. He let go of the tablet, and it clattered onto the bedside table. For a long time, he just stared at the ceiling, the silence in the room thick and heavy. 22 years, he said, not to Emily, but to the room, to the past. He was with me when my son was born. He was with me when my wife passed away. He held my stock options, for heaven's sake. I trusted him, more than anyone. Emily didn't know what to say. The platitudes that adults offered in times of grief felt flimsy and useless. So she said nothing. She simply sat there, a quiet presence in the wreckage of a powerful man's trust. Her grandfather had taught her that, too. Sometimes, the most important thing you can do for a man who is bleeding is to just be there, to bear witness and not let him be alone. After a few minutes, Mr. Harrison turned his head and looked at her. The storm in his eyes had subsided, replaced by a weary calm. Your grandfather, he said. He could read people better than any man I ever met. He'd spot a liar from 100 yards. He once told me that the closer someone insists on standing to you, the more carefully you should watch their hands. I got too comfortable. I stopped watching. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. I'm sorry you had to see that, Emily. This world of mine, it can be a viper pit. Grandpa said the world is the world. Emily replied softly, surprising herself. He said there are vipers everywhere. In the jungle, in the boardroom, in the heart. The trick isn't to find a place with no vipers. It's to learn their patterns and carry the right antidote. A ghost of a smile touched Mr. Harrison's lips. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it changed his entire face, softening the hard lines and revealing a glimpse of the young man who had once followed a brave medic through a war-torn jungle. Thomas Carter's granddaughter, through and through, he murmured. He reached for a remote on his bedside table and pressed a button. Let's get you and your mother out of here. This is no place for you tonight. A quiet, impeccably dressed woman entered the room. She was Mr. Harrison's executive assistant, a woman named Susan who radiated an aura of calm competence. Susan, please escort Miss Carter and her mother to the Aspen estate. Give them the master guest suite. Ensure they have everything they need. Everything, he repeated, his eyes meeting Susan's with a look of steely command. From this moment on, they are my personal guests, and their safety and comfort are your top priority. Of course, Mr. Harrison, Susan said, her gaze flickering to Emily with a newfound respect. As Emily stood to leave, Mr. Harrison spoke again. Emily, don't let this ugliness tarnish you. You have a gift, a clarity. Your grandfather had it. Don't ever lose it. Emily nodded, unable to speak. She was led from the hospital, back to the private lounge where her mother was still pacing, her face a mask of anxiety. What happened? Is he all right? They wouldn't tell me anything, Carol said, rushing to Emily. He's okay, Emily said. But they found out who did it. Susan cleared her throat gently. Ma'am, Mr. Harrison has requested that you accompany me to his residence. A car is waiting. Carol looked from Susan's polite, impassive face to her daughter's pale, shaken one. The uniform she wore suddenly felt heavy and coarse, a relic from a life that had ceased to exist the moment her daughter had knelt beside a dying man. The ride to Mr. Harrison's estate was silent. They drove through the gates of a sprawling property, up a winding road lined with aspen trees, their leaves shimmering like gold coins in the late afternoon sun. The house wasn't just a house. It was a cathedral of wood and glass, nestled into the mountainside, with panoramic views of the snow-capped peaks. The guest suite they were shown to was larger than their entire apartment. It had a fireplace, a balcony, and a bathroom lined with marble. Awaiting them were trays of food, stacks of fresh towels, and a wardrobe filled with new clothes in their sizes, soft sweaters, comfortable pants, and warm jackets. Carol walked through the rooms, touching the fine fabrics and polished surfaces as if she were in a dream. She stopped in front of a floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the breathtaking vista. This is his life, she whispered, a sense of wonder and fear in her voice. And now somehow, it's ours. She turned to face Emily, her eyes filled with a fierce, protective love. You saved him, Emily. You did this amazing, impossible thing. But this world, it's dangerous. The man who tried to kill him was his doctor, his friend. How can you trust anyone in a world like that? Emily walked to her mother's side, following her gaze out the window. The mountains were solid, ancient, and real. They were a comfort. You don't trust everyone, Emily said, her voice steady. You trust the right people. Grandpa trusted Mr. Harrison, and Mr. Harrison trusted him. That's what matters. The rest is just noise. Carol wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. For the first time all day, the fear in her heart began to recede, replaced by a wave of immense pride. Her daughter was not just a genius, she was wise. And in the uncertain, glittering, and dangerous world they had just been thrown into, that wisdom would be their most valuable possession. Later that evening, as Emily sat by the fireplace reading a book she'd found on the shelf, Susan entered quietly. "Excuse me, Emily," she said. "Detective Miller is here. He has an update on Dr. Evans. He would like to speak with you, if you're willing." Emily found her mother in the main living area, speaking with a man in a rumpled suit, who looked as out of place amongst the rustic elegance as they were. Detective Miller stood by the massive stone fireplace, his notebook in hand. He gave Emily a tired but respectful smile. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice raspy from a long day. "Thanks for speaking with me. I know this is a lot to process." Emily nodded, taking a seat on a large leather couch. Carol hovered nearby, a protective sentinel. "Is Dr. Evans, did he say why?" Miller sighed, flipping a page in his notebook. "He did. It wasn't pretty. Took a bit of pressure, but people like Evans, they're not hardened criminals. They're arrogant. And when their arrogance is shattered, they tend to talk. They want you to know how clever they were, even when they've failed." He paused, choosing his words carefully. It wasn't a personal grudge, not in the way you might think. It was about money and pride. Dr. Evans made a series of catastrophic investments over the past year. He was leveraged to the hilt in a biotech firm that was set to be acquired by Harrison Industries. He thought he had insider information that the deal would go through, making him a fortune. But the deal didn't go through, Emily stated, not as a question, but as a conclusion. Miller's eyebrows raised a fraction. "That's right. Last week, Mr. Harrison pulled out. Said the company's research was fraudulent. The stock plummeted, and Evans was completely wiped out. He lost everything. His home, his savings, everything. He was facing total ruin and public humiliation. So he decided to kill Mr. Harrison?" Carol asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "For money. For revenge, mostly," Miller corrected. In his mind, Mr. Harrison had personally destroyed him. He saw it as an act of betrayal. He told us he wanted Mr. Harrison to die thinking he was having a simple heart attack, never knowing who was responsible. A final, secret victory for the man who'd lost everything. He shook his head. The poison was his specialty. He'd done research on fast-acting toxins for a military contractor years ago. He was confident no one on a plane would ever be able to diagnose it in time. "He didn't count on you, young lady," Miller added, a genuine admiration in his weary eyes. "He kept asking us, how did she know? Who is she?" He couldn't comprehend that his perfect plan was unraveled by an 11-year-old girl. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Her grandfather had always said that pride was a more potent poison than cyanide. It blinded men to possibilities they couldn't imagine, making them predictable. Dr. Evans hadn't seen her. He'd seen a maid's daughter, an insignificant piece of the background, and that oversight had been his undoing. "What will happen to him?" Emily asked. "He'll be charged with attempted murder, among other things. He'll go away for a very long time," Miller said. He closed his notebook. "That's all for now. We may need a formal statement from you tomorrow. For now, Mr. Harrison's security team is handling everything here. You're in safe hands." After the detective left, a heavy silence fell over the room. The crackling of the fire was the only sound. Carol finally sank into a chair opposite Emily, her face pale. "All of this," she said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent room, "it's built on things I don't understand. Deals, stocks, revenge. It's like a different language. Your grandfather, he ran from this world. He wanted a simple life. And now, here we are, right in the middle of it." "Grandpa didn't run," Emily said, her voice firm. "He chose. He told me he saw men in the war who had everything and were worth nothing, and men who had nothing but were worth everything. He chose what had value to him." Carol looked at her daughter, at the old soul residing in her young eyes. "And what has value to you, Emily?" It was a question Emily had never really considered. Her world had been small, defined by the four walls of their apartment, the aisles of the public library, and the boundless universe within the pages of her books. Now, the walls had been blown away. The world was suddenly vast and full of frightening, glittering possibilities. "I don't know yet," Emily answered honestly. But I think I'm going to find out. The next morning, Emily woke to the smell of coffee and bacon and a profound sense of dislocation. Sunlight streamed through the massive window of her room, illuminating the majestic mountain peaks. For a moment, she thought she was still dreaming. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back in a dizzying flood. She found her mother in the kitchen, a vast expanse of stainless steel and marble, talking quietly with Susan. Carol was wearing one of the soft cashmere sweaters that had been left for them. She looked different. The perpetual tension in her shoulders had eased, and while her expression was still wary, there was a new softness in her eyes. "Good morning, Emily," Susan said with a warm smile. "Mr. Harrison has already arranged for a tutor to meet with you this afternoon to discuss your educational needs. He's also taken the liberty of freezing your mother's employment contract with the agency. A severance package is being sent to her that will ensure she is comfortable for life." Carol looked like she might faint. "For life? Mr. Harrison is a man who repays his debts," Susan said simply. "He considers his life a rather significant one." The news was just beginning to sink in when Susan's phone buzzed. Her expression turned serious. "It appears the story has broken," she said, her voice tight. "A flight attendant on yesterday's flight leaked the details to a tabloid. It's sensationalized, but the core facts are there. Billionaire saved mid-flight by mystery teen genius." She turned on the large television in the living room. There it was, Emily's face, a grainy cell phone picture taken by another passenger during the chaos. She looked pale and fierce, a strange combination of child and adult. The headline was splashed across the screen in bold letters. News anchors were discussing the event with breathless excitement, speculating about her identity, her connection to Mr. Harrison, and the extraordinary knowledge she possessed. Suddenly, the world had a name for her. She was no longer just Emily Carter, the maid's daughter. She was the mystery teen genius. Emily felt a wave of nausea. This was the part her grandfather had never prepared her for. He had taught her how to survive in the shadows, how to observe without being seen. He had never taught her how to stand in a spotlight, so bright it threatened to burn. Carol immediately moved to her daughter's side, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. "Turn it off," she said to Susan, her voice sharp. "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Susan replied, her eyes filled with a pained sympathy. "This is only the beginning. The world is going to want to know who Emily Carter is. And there are people in this world, Mr. Harrison's rivals, who will see her not as a hero, but as a new piece on the chessboard." The implication was clear. Emily hadn't just saved a life, she had entered the game. A high-stakes game with rules she didn't know, and players who were far more dangerous than a desperate, debt-ridden doctor. Her heroic act had made her a target. Just then, Mr. Harrison's voice, surprisingly strong, boomed from a speakerphone that Susan had discreetly placed on the coffee table. He was obviously watching the same news report from his hospital bed. "Don't you worry about a thing, Emily," his voice crackled. "I've spent my life playing this game. They want to know who you are? Fine. We'll tell them. We'll write the story ourselves. You are Thomas Carter's granddaughter, and you are under my protection. Let them come." His words were meant to be reassuring, a declaration of power from a man who wielded it like a shield. But to Emily, they sounded like the closing of a door. The quiet, invisible life she had known was over. A new one, a loud, complicated, and dangerous one, was just beginning. She looked out the window again at the silent, unyielding mountains and wondered if she would ever feel as solid and steady as they looked. Mr. Harrison's words, crackling with authority through the speakerphone, did little to calm the storm brewing inside Emily. Protection felt like a cage, and his promise to write the story sounded like he was taking the one thing she truly owned, her own life, and turning it into a press release. The grainy photo of her on the screen felt like a violation, a snapshot of her fear and focus stolen and broadcast to millions without her consent. She wasn't a hero. She was a girl who knew about poisons because her grandfather had a sad life. Carol, however, clung to the billionaire's words like a life raft. For the first time since boarding that terrifying flight, she felt a glimmer of safety. Mr. Harrison wasn't just a rich man. He was a fortress, and he was offering them shelter. She squeezed Emily's shoulder, a silent plea for her to accept this powerful, unexpected lifeline. The next few hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos, orchestrated by a man in a hospital bed miles away. Susan's phone became the central nervous system of the operation. Calls were made, orders were given. A top-tier public relations firm in New York was retained. A security detail, composed of discreet men with sharp eyes and ill-fitting suits, materialized at the estate, their presence both reassuring and deeply unnerving. They spoke in low murmurs into their wrists and moved with a silent, purposeful grace. By midday, the promised tutor arrived. He was not the gentle, tweed-wearing academic Emily had pictured. His name was Arthur Middleton, a man in his late 40s with a military posture, a razor-sharp mind, and an unnerving ability to assess a person with a single glance. His official title was educational consultant, but it was immediately clear he was much more than that. He was a strategist, a mentor, and a guide to the world of the ultra-wealthy. "Your grandfather, Sergeant Carter, was a remarkable man," Arthur said, his voice calm and direct as he sat opposite Emily in the estate's vast library. He had dismissed Carol with a polite but firm request for privacy. "I've reviewed his service record. What he taught you goes far beyond memorizing facts. He taught you to think critically under pressure. That is a skill far more valuable than any inheritance." Emily remained silent, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. "Mr. Harrison believes, and I concur," Arthur continued, unfazed by her reticence, "that your education from this point forward should reflect your unique aptitudes. Standard schooling would be insufficient. We will focus on subjects you are drawn to, medicine, chemistry, history, but also on things you will need to understand now: economics, corporate law, game theory, and personal security." "You want to teach me how to be rich," Emily said, the words sharp with accusation. Arthur's expression didn't change. "No," he corrected gently. "Mr. Harrison is already giving you wealth. I am here to teach you how to be powerful. There is a significant difference. Wealth can be taken. Power, true power, resides here," he said, tapping his temple. "It is the ability to protect what you value. Your grandfather understood that. He had very little wealth, but he possessed immense power. The power to save lives." The comparison to her grandfather was a calculated, brilliant move. It was the first thing that had managed to pierce through Emily's defensive shell. She wouldn't be a pawn in Mr. Harrison's world, but maybe, just maybe, she could learn to be a player in her own. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. While Emily was having her first lesson in power, Carol was receiving her own education. Susan sat with her in the sun-drenched living room, a laptop open, displaying a series of documents. Bank accounts, trust funds, investment portfolios. The numbers were staggering, incomprehensible. "Mr. Harrison has established a trust in your name, Carol," Susan explained, her tone patient and professional. "It will generate an income that will more than provide for you for the rest of your life. He has also purchased your apartment building." Carol stared at her, dumbfounded. "He what?" "He bought the building. The laundromat, the 3 apartments above it. The deed is being transferred to you. He felt that you should have a tangible asset, a piece of the world that is entirely your own, free and clear." Susan smiled softly. "His instructions were," and I quote, "a woman should never have to worry about a roof over her head." Tears welled in Carol's eyes. It wasn't just the money. It was the thoughtfulness, the quiet dignity of the gesture. He hadn't just thrown cash at them. He had understood the deep, gnawing fear of instability that had been her constant companion for her entire adult life. He had given her a foundation, a home that no one could ever take away. The first public move in Mr. Harrison's campaign to write the story came that evening. A formal press release was issued by Harrison Industries. It was a masterpiece of corporate communication crafted by the expensive PR firm. It confirmed the events of the flight, lauded Emily's quick thinking and extraordinary calm, and most importantly, it framed her not as a mystery, but as a legacy. It revealed her identity. Emily Carter, the 11-year-old granddaughter of the late Sergeant Thomas Carter, a decorated war hero and medic who had served alongside Michael Harrison in Vietnam. It spoke of a lifelong friendship, of a debt of honor. It explained that Mr. Harrison, in gratitude for his life being saved twice by the same family, was taking full financial responsibility for Emily's education and her mother's well-being, fulfilling a promise made to his old friend decades ago. The narrative was perfect. It transformed the story from a sensational tabloid headline into a heartwarming tale of heroism, loyalty, and a promise fulfilled. Emily was no longer a freakish child genius. She was the worthy heir to a heroic legacy. The media devoured it. The mystery teen became the hero's granddaughter. But as Arthur had warned, with visibility came new dangers. The day after the press release, a package arrived at the estate. It was addressed specifically to Emily Carter. Despite the layers of new security, it had slipped through, delivered by a high-end courier service that had bypassed the main gate. The security team immediately isolated the package, their faces grim. They scanned it for explosives, for biological agents, for any conceivable threat. Finding none, a security expert, a former bomb disposal technician with nerves of steel, carefully opened it in a secure room. Inside, there was no threat. There was something far more insidious. It was a single, perfect, long-stemmed white rose, and a simple, typewritten note. The note read, "A mind like yours is a rare and beautiful thing. It should not be wasted in the service of old men. There are others in the world who would value your talents far more. When you are ready to choose your own path, we will find you." There was no signature, no return address, nothing to identify the sender. But the message was chillingly clear. Someone else was watching her. Someone who knew that the most effective way to influence a person isn't with a threat, but with an offer of something they desperately want. A choice. Susan brought the note to Emily and Arthur in the library. Carol, seeing the gravity on their faces, stood by the door, wringing her hands. Arthur read the note, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said, his voice betraying a hint of grudging respect. "It seems you have an admirer. A sophisticated one." Emily took the note, her fingers tracing the typewritten letters. The words resonated with the rebellious, resentful thoughts she had been having all day. Choose your own path. It was a seductive whisper in a world of commands. Mr. Harrison's protection was a golden cage. He was offering her a future he had designed, a life of his choosing, all in the name of a promise made to her grandfather. But what if her path was different? What if she didn't want to be a piece in his game, a living monument to his loyalty? The anonymous note wasn't a threat, it was a seed of doubt. And as Emily stared at the words, she felt that seed begin to take root in the fertile ground of her brilliant, questioning mind. The world was indeed a viper pit, she thought. But she was beginning to realize that not all the vipers made noise. Some of them just offered you a rose. The arrival of the white rose and its cryptic message sent a quiet shockwave through the Aspen estate. Mr. Harrison, still recovering in the hospital, was immediately informed. The security detail doubled, and a quiet, intense investigation into the source of the package began, yielding nothing. The sender was a ghost, a professional who had left no trace. This new, unseen player added a layer of psychological tension to their situation that was far more unnerving than the clumsy, desperate act of a ruined doctor. For Emily, the note became a secret talisman. She kept it tucked inside her grandfather's book of memoirs. It was a physical reminder that Mr. Harrison's world was not the only one, that her future was not a settled matter. The words, "When you are ready to choose your own path, we will find you," echoed in her mind during her lessons with Arthur. As he taught her about leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers, she saw the lessons not just as a manual for operating within Mr. Harrison's world, but as a potential arsenal for defending her own. A week after the incident on the plane, Mr. Harrison was discharged from the hospital. He was thinner, and the lines on his face were etched deeper, but the fire in his eyes burned as fiercely as ever. He returned to the Aspen estate, and one of his first acts was to summon Emily to his study. The room was the heart of his empire when he was away from Wall Street. It was paneled in dark oak, with a fireplace large enough to stand in and a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single, ancient tree. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, not for decoration, but with the well-worn look of constant use. Mr. Harrison was standing by the window, looking out at the mountains, his back to her. "Arthur tells me you are an exceptional student," he said, his voice raspy. "That you absorb complex information as if you were born to it." "I like to learn," Emily said simply, standing in the center of the room, feeling small but not intimidated. He turned to face her. "He also tells me you are resistant, that you question everything, that you hold a part of yourself back." He gestured to a leather armchair in front of his desk. Sit. Emily sat. Mr. Harrison moved behind his desk, a king returning to his throne. He steepled his fingers, his gaze intense. We need to talk about the note. What about it? Emily asked, her hand instinctively going to the pocket where she imagined the folded paper rested. It was from a rival, he said, his voice flat and hard. A competitor. There are very few people in the world with the resources and audacity to make such a move. I have my suspicions. They see you as I see you, a unique asset. They are trying to sow dissent, to turn you against me before our relationship has even begun. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. They are offering you a choice. I am offering you a promise. A promise I made to your grandfather. A promise to give you a future he could only dream of. I will give you the best education, the best opportunities. I will make you my protege. One day, you could even have a seat on the board of Harrison Industries. All I ask for in return is your loyalty. There it was. The price of the golden cage. Loyalty. It was the same currency he had shared with her grandfather, a bond forged in battle. But her grandfather had chosen that bond. Emily was being assigned it. What if my path is different? She asked, her voice quiet but steady, echoing the words from the note. What if I don't want to sit on your board? What if I want to be a doctor? Or a research scientist? What if I want a quiet life, like my grandfather chose? Mr. Harrison leaned back, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected fear, or gratitude, or even youthful defiance. He had not expected a calm, rational negotiation. He was treating her like a child to be molded, and she was responding like a peer at a bargaining table. If you want to be a doctor, he said slowly, a new respect dawning in his voice, I will build you a hospital. If you want to be a scientist, I will fund a research institute in your name. That is the power I am offering you. The power to pursue any path, but with resources you cannot imagine. But it would always be your hospital, Emily countered. It would be the Harrison Institute. Your name, your power, your control. My grandfather ran into a firefight to save you. I used his knowledge to save you on the plane. The debt is paid, Mr. Harrison. My future shouldn't be a repayment plan. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken tension. Emily's heart was pounding, but her voice remained even. This was the moment of choice. Not for some distant future, but now. Mr. Harrison was silent for a full minute, studying the young girl in front of him. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the intelligence in her clear blue eyes, and the unwavering courage that was pure Thomas Carter. He saw a will of iron that could not be bent, only broken, and he had no desire to break it. In that moment, he realized his mistake. He had been trying to fulfill his promise to his old friend by controlling his granddaughter's future, but the greatest gift he could give her, the truest way to honor the man who had valued freedom above all else, was to give her that choice himself. A slow smile spread across his face, the same genuine, unguarded smile she had seen once before in the hospital. You are absolutely right, he said, the tension in the room instantly dissolving. The debt is paid. My promise to your grandfather was not to own his family's future, but to give them one. The choice of what to do with it, that must be yours. He stood up and walked around the desk, coming to a stop in front of her. He looked less like a king now, and more like an old soldier who had finally understood the terms of a long-awaited peace. So, Emily Carter, he said, extending his hand. Let's start over. My name is Michael. It's a pleasure to meet you. Tell me, what is it you want to do first? Tears pricked Emily's eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of a profound, overwhelming relief. She had walked into the lion's den and had not been devoured. She had spoken her truth to a powerful man, and he had listened. She took his outstretched hand. It was not the closing of a deal, but the beginning of an alliance. First, she said, a small smile playing on her own lips, I want to finish the book I was reading. The final twist came not with a bang, but with a quiet, unassuming letter that arrived a month later. The investigation into the White Rose had continued, a silent, relentless hunt conducted by the best security analysts Mr. Harrison's money could buy. They had finally traced the untraceable courier back to a shell corporation and through a dozen more layers of digital misdirection to its source. Mr. Harrison called Emily and Carol into the study. He held a single sheet of paper in his hand, his face a mask of weary disbelief. We found him, he said. The man who sent you the rose. Emily's mind raced through the list of Harrison's corporate rivals, the ruthless men Arthur had described to her. It wasn't a competitor, Mr. Harrison said, his voice heavy. He slid the paper across the desk. It was a file, a summary of a man's life. His name was Arthur Middleton. Emily stared at the name. Arthur, her tutor, the man who had taught her about power, who had so astutely analyzed her grandfather's character, who had warned her about the dangers of her new life. Arthur has been working for me for 10 years, Mr. Harrison explained, his voice hollow. He's the best. A former intelligence agent, recruited to be my son's tutor, and later, my most trusted strategic advisor. He vetted every major decision, every new hire. He vetted Dr. Evans. The implication hung in the air, cold and heavy. The note wasn't a recruitment offer from a rival, Mr. Harrison continued, piecing it together. It was a test. From him. To you. He was testing your loyalty, your character. He was trying to see if you could be manipulated, if you would be a weakness in my organization, or a new, powerful asset. But there was more. The file contained Arthur's service history. And as Emily scanned the page, her eyes fell on a single line that made the blood run cold in her veins. Before his time in private intelligence, Arthur Middleton had served in the Army. He was a medic, not just any medic. For 2 years, he had served as the personal protege and field assistant to a legendary sergeant, a man renowned for his unconventional methods and unparalleled skill in battlefield medicine. A man who had taught him everything he knew. His commanding officer had been Sergeant Thomas Carter. Arthur hadn't just known of her grandfather. He had known him. He had been his student. Emily finally understood. Arthur wasn't just testing her for Mr. Harrison. He was testing her for himself, for the legacy of their shared mentor. The white rose, the offer of choice. It was a challenge from one of her grandfather's students to another. It was his way of asking, "Are you worthy of his name?" Her confrontation with Mr. Harrison, her demand for autonomy, she had passed the test. The world suddenly felt infinitely larger and more complex than she had ever imagined. It was not a simple chessboard of black and white, of friends and enemies. It was a tangled web of histories, loyalties, and hidden connections, and she was standing right in the center of it. Her journey had not ended with a promise fulfilled. It had just truly begun. She was no longer just the maid's daughter or the hero's granddaughter. She was a player in a game she was only beginning to understand, with allies and adversaries hidden in every shadow, all watching to see what Emily Carter would do next. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comments section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.